We have space up here, so if you want to fill the side tables, am I correct on that, Neil? So come on up is the answer. Thanks. Yeah.
Repeat this like after 2 or 3 times.
Absolutely.
Because I know why people are staying out.
Thanks. Just to repeat, we don't want anybody filling in the back rows. Come on up to the front rows so we can have a better dialogue. Yes, please. Testing. Okay. We have a lot of people still standing. I just wanted to repeat, either sit in the front row here on both sides, or please fill the chairs in the center. Yeah? So it's front row or fill the entire center, please. To start. Thanks. We're going to get started in 2 minutes, please. Okay, so as everybody gets settled in, I'll just kind of set the landscape a little bit. We're going to do our best to finish at 8:30. With the number of people that we have on the panel, I'm sure it's going to work. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So I would suggest those who are in the back row with the youth, we'd like you in the front row there. Yeah, all of you, please fill in the front row seats. So we would, ideally for us, we have the arch around the center. We have seats in the center. They're meant to be filled. So that's the first priority, is to fill the center. And the instructions from the director, Rabia, is to be as inclusive as possible and as participatory as possible as well. I also wanted to introduce my co-presenter here, Joy Doreen Beats, who's from Uganda, joining us from Kenya. I just want to make sure she's in the room. Joy, you here? You're there. Okay. So right you and I are sitting here to start, right?
Yes, that's
great.
For sure.
Perfect. And I'm just going to repeat it for the last time. For those sitting in the back, we don't want you in the back. We would like to have you as close as possible to here. And we'll get started in a minute. The Deputy DG is going to join us as soon as we get everybody seated, and it's all yours. I think we can finish by 8:30, Rabia, right? Hour and 15 minutes is pretty healthy.
I know a lot of us love the back seats, but it would be nice for you to take the seat in front of you. If it's empty, you please occupy it, so whoever comes in after can take the seat that's right behind you. Thank you.
We still have some seats in the center. We'd rather have them filled, please. And then Joy and I are going to call up those that are be sitting on the stage. Joy and I will be on the stage to begin with, and then we'll intermingle. But again, as once we get through our questions for the distinguished panelists, we do want to open the floor for questions to have as much interactive as possible. Okay, I see we'll get 3 or more to get seated, and then we'll get started. DG, do you want to go ahead and get us rolling? Yeah, thanks very, very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a pleasure to have you all here today for this session, which I think is really the highlight of today's many events that we've had. And the best thing is that in the session here today, when we normally we call for the sessions and the participation to be more inclusive, you're really looking at more women joining in the session. And while here, we're happy to have the inclusivity with more men joining in, and I'm so happy to see so many of you here. The energy transition to renewables, to distributed energy systems, decarbonized energy systems, is, as we all know, is going to open up a huge host of opportunity in terms of the social benefits that we are going to get, but more importantly, in terms of the kind of employment that we will see coming in this sector. In the last session, Rabia had pointed out that if we can get it right, and if we all move towards getting the deployment of renewables and energy transition technologies to match what is needed for the 1.5 degree scenario, then we are looking at moving from about 12.7 million in renewable energy jobs at present to about just under 40 million. So it's going to be a huge opportunity that will unfold with jobs that are decent, jobs that can really get the creativity and the higher skill levels that will pretty much form part of the kind of jobs that will be on offer. But what we are also hearing from CEOs, from other senior management around the world in companies, is that talent is going to be the biggest challenge and the biggest bottleneck. And which is why it's so important to make sure that the energy transition to a decarbonized energy system, the energy system of the future, doesn't exclude women from this opportunity and can draw in more women into this sector. While the solar PV does have about 40% women, but the other renewables really need to catch up. And I think it's not enough for us to say that, at least we're doing better than fossil fuels, but we can't be comparing ourselves to fossil fuels. We have to do much, much better. So in this session, we will hear about the groundbreaking reports that Irina has been doing to bring in the gender perspective, to be able to share with you what is it, which is the current play and what needs to be done, because clearly intentionality of hiring more women and being able to open up the work environment and working conditions in a way that more women can join the workforce is clearly going to be very important. And Irina will continue to work on these in this area to provide with what kind of policy levers are needed within the companies. What is it that governments can do to help in this transition? What's the kind of education that needs to be also be more inclusive? So we are definitely going to be hearing a lot in this segment about these reports that we've done in Irina, and we'll continue to do so. But I'd now like to, first I'll invite Ms. Dite Jorgensen, Director General for Energy at the European Commission, to open the event, and our Director for Knowledge Policy Finance, Rabia Furioki, who's also the designated gender focal point for Irina, will set the scene to take us through the research that Irina has done and point out to us the main highlights. So thank you so much for being here and joining us.
Thank you very much for the... Thank you very much, Deputy Director General Gowdy, for your kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this event. Solar power is absolutely critical in the energy transition and critical to achieve climate neutrality. Women are absolutely central to the energy transition and central to achieving climate neutrality. So to bring the two together, solar and the gender perspective, is a great idea, and I'm very glad that we have this opportunity. And to all the men in the room, I'm not trying to exclude you by saying that. You also have a critical role in the energy transition and towards achieving climate neutrality. But the fact is that about 20% of our energy task force in Europe is women. So men represent close to 80% of energy labor force in Europe. 12% of solar panel installers in Europe are women, compared to 50% of the workforce. So there's a lot of good female hands and brains out there that can contribute to solar photovoltaic installment, and that can contribute to the energy transition, and that can contribute to climate neutrality. And we need to make that happen together, and that, I think, is one of the important points of this event and of the report. So solar in Europe constitute a very significant part of the increase of renewable energy. As we have been addressing the energy shortage, addressing the energy crisis, one of the key points has been, of course, renewables. And among the renewables, photovoltaic, solar, is the one that you can install most swiftly. You can install it locally. We're all sitting at home waiting for that installer to come put the photovoltaics on our rooftops, because we're going to need that to pay energy bills, to stay energy secure, and to lower our carbon footprint, each of us individually and collectively as a society, as an economy, and as industries. So we need more solar, and we need to deploy that quickly. As you have said, talent and skills are a real shortage in that context. We need more installers, we need more development, we need more education in these sectors in order to get the skills that are needed, and we need to bring the women on board for that, and we need to address what is a gender bias or gender blindness, if you will, in the various policies we have. In addition to bringing in more hands, women often bring a different perspective from men to some of these sectors, and simply having the full plate in there, representing 100% of the population, is, everything else being equal, going to give us better ideas, more different ideas, a different dynamic as we develop new technologies, new approaches, new ways of doing things. We can do that much, much better if we do it together, men and women, and from across all parts of society. What we have seen across Europe is that women in leadership positions can indeed help opening up systems, making some of the changes that are necessary, taking things out of the comfort zone, and that is absolutely fundamental as we accelerate our efforts to address the climate crisis. So we need to do that to bring gender equality also to our energy policy. The way we are approaching it, where I work, the Director General for Energy of the European Commission, is that we've established an internal working group task force to integrate gender issues across all of the work we do, in the work in the energy transition, in our work on energy efficiency, in our work with member states and stakeholders. And of course, in starting that work and taking that work forward, the critical point to start with is to make sure that we have information if we have the data. So we have started by collecting data to get more insights into gender aspects in the energy sector. How does it look in terms of the participation of women? What is the difference across the European Union? Are there any local or national examples of what can be done differently to bring in more women into the energy sector? And so similar to the work ongoing here in IRENA, that data, that analysis is a critical starting point. We are lucky in the European Commission that we have a very strong female leadership on energy issues. Our President, Ursula von der Leyen, is leading the green transition under the Green Deal, and our Commissioner, Kadri Simpson, who will be arriving here as well, is leading energy policy and the change in energy policy across the European Union. And I think we can hopefully learn from that and work together on that in order to make the change also globally, and in particular in renewable energy, and in working with our stakeholders from across the world. So with that, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dite, and thank you, Deputy Director General Gauri, and to all of you for being here today. As you know, at IRENA, we've been working on the gender issue for about a decade now. In 2011 already, we had in our jobs report a chapter dedicated to women, and in particular in the context of access. Since then, we have tried to mainstream the gender issue in our annual jobs review. which we've had now for 10 years. And in 2018, we started this series on gender because we wanted to know there was really no reference base data in terms of data as to how many women work in the renewable energy sector, which is why we first did a global survey, followed by wind, and now with solar today. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here and to share some of the insights from this report. So just to contextualize a little bit, you can see on the slide that we have been estimating the number of jobs in renewables since 2012. In 2021, we were 12.7 million. We were 7.3 when we started this series. And obviously, solar PV takes the top spot with 4.3 million, which is over a third of the workforce. Decentralized renewables, in particular solar PV, are creating a growing number of jobs, even if the statistics doesn't completely capture that picture. We also have estimates of future jobs that we've been doing also for about 6-7 years, and the solar PV sector jobs could more than triple globally by 2030. Now, another series that we have done for the past, again, 6-7 years is look at each renewable energy technology and the segments of the value chain in terms of labor and material requirements, as well as the profile or the occupational profile required, what kind of jobs are required along the segments of the value chain. You see the PV here, where we look at STEM fields jobs, but also high qualification in non-STEM fields. But interestingly enough, there are also a lot of jobs with lower formal skills, example in construction, that could be leveraged from different industries, including oil and gas, for example. Now, in terms of the women's share in the energy sector, as you know, I've repeated a few times today, the 32% that we found in our global survey, which is better than the conventional sector. But then looking at renewable energy, specific technologies in renewable energy, then we see huge differences. So you have 32% for the global, 21% for wind, and then we now found with this latest global survey that it's 40% for solar PV. This is, of course, much better than wind and definitely than oil and gas, but with still, as Diti was saying, below the average of women working in the overall economy, which is about 46%. Now, in terms of women's share by role, we have similar findings in the wind and the overall renewable energy sector. Women working in solar are better represented in administrative roles. And I think it's important to highlight that because they're usually lower salaries, but also decision-making authorities. So we have a share of 58% in administrative roles. And this is higher than 45% of the renewable energy sector. Now, in non-STEM technical positions, like lawyers, for example, and human resource professionals, they account for about 38%, and in STEM position, 32%. Women's share in managerial positions, I don't think this is going to be any news, but gender inequality is more evident at decision-making levels. It's very well reported for the economy as a whole, in policy making and governance. Women's presence on company boards and in senior management positions is painfully small. And I think that's very important given the absence of female role model is definitely something that impacts and trickles down, but it's particularly acute in energy-related fields. In our analysis, this new analysis on PV, women are faring better in managerial and senior management jobs. In PV, they're faring better than in wind, and they account for close to 17% in senior management role. Now, in terms of the women's share by region and role, there's some interesting findings, but I'll let you have the report in the nice bag that we produced for this event, and a nice notebook that you can also use. There are some differences, but they're not major, I would say. One maybe that stands out is that the fact that the share of solar PV employment, women in solar PV employment, the share is smaller in North America and Latin America and the Caribbean than it is in the Asia Pacific and Africa region. But many other insights are in the report. Now, in terms of share by activity, manufacturing appears to employ the greatest proportion of women, 47%, and then other activities, which includes things like consultancy, think tank, academia, and research institutes, follows after the 47% in manufacturing, with about 40%. Now, very briefly, I think we all know what the barriers to entry, retention, and advancement are in general in the economy. But just to be quick on barriers to entry, it shows the exact same in this survey as the other surveys we've done. Two of the major barriers identified were obviously the perception of gender roles and social and cultural norms. And usually this is followed by the lack of gender targets and hiring practices. For barriers to retaining women in the industry, in the solar workforce, it was much higher than those related to job entry and career advancement. That was one of the interesting findings. Now, despite performing better in the decision-making positions compared to the previous surveys that we've done, when asked about the barriers to advancement, respondents highlighted again the social and cultural norms as the most challenging or the biggest challenge. And that's usually followed by mobility requirements. There are other policies that respondents highlighted, like the lack of child care and the absence of gender targets and workplace flexibility, etc. I think we all know this from our own experiences. We have some interesting insights on gender pay gap, which I will not go into because in the interest of time. Maybe just I will finish with measures to engender the energy transition. The report, and so do previous reports that we've done on gender, really highlight some of the important recommendations, important policy or measures that need to be introduced in order to engender, let's say, the workforce, understanding the complexity of issues that women face by raising gender awareness, improving national policies and removing restrictive laws. An important one is ensuring that all parents are entitled to parental leave, establishing better workplace practices, policies, and regulations. As Dita mentioned, the gender disaggregated data, increasing transparency, in particular for hiring practices, offering parental leave beyond the national law, different measures to introduce flexibility arrangement for work, etc. Another major aspect was forming networks and systems to support training and mentorships. And I think many of you have experienced these measures or are in different groups to try to mentor young women or try to raise awareness. In general, maybe just to finish, improving women's representation in solar PV can really help attain the multiple SDGs, but also needs to be part of a broader objective, which is diversifying the workforce as a whole. So it can include, as was mentioned earlier, everyone's vision, talents, and skills, and this means not only women, but obviously other minority groups. Before I finish, I would like to just thank Celia. Celia has been leading the work on gender, but she doesn't like to present. So she has done a great job at promoting this activity at Arena and beyond. And I would like to now give the floor, thank you for your attention, of course, and I'd like to give the floor now to Joy and John, who are going to be leading the discussion. Thank you again.
Good. Thanks very, very
you.
much. Joy is going to bring all the panelists up to the stage, but I had one quick question for you, Rabia, if you want to grab that microphone quickly. Is it because solar was the first mover that it has the highest penetration, or is it a bias towards solar because women really support its implementation? Do we have any indications from the studies?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the deployment of solar PV has been growing very fast. Second of all, there are many different kinds of jobs. In access, you have a lot of jobs which you don't necessarily find in solar, which you don't necessarily find in wind. And I think it's been, maybe Valborga will speak about it, but the more decentralized nature that we've seen in terms of solar deployment has helped quite a bit. And maybe also the different types of skills that is more diversified, I think, in solar has helped. So, but I'm sure we'll hear about the solar industry much more.
I think I told you this tale, but
Right.
I started at CNN in cable television, and the founder of CNN was Ted Turner. He was a crazy guy, but really creative. And his moniker was, I was in cable before cable was cool, because there was no cable in America, and they laid down the cable. You guys were in gender when it comes to renewables before it was cool at all. I mean, as you said, it's 10 years into it. So it's refreshing to know that we have a panel on it, right? Which is fantastic. So
Indeed.
nice round of applause for all three of you doing that.
Thank you so much to our speakers who have sort of set the stage for a conversation we're going to have now. And I would now like to invite our panelists. I'm going to start with Ms. Babel Horn, who is the Energy Commissioner for Africa of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. A round of applause for her. Next is Honorable Dr. Kande Yamkela, who is from the National Grand Coalition, and he's the parliamentary leader, actually, in Sierra Leone. But he is also, among other things, the ambassador and co-chair of the Strategy Group on Energy as well. A round of applause for him. Rosilena Lindo, Deputy Secretary of Energy, Panama. A round of applause for her. Vera Rodenhoff, who is the Deputy Director General at the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs. A round of applause for her as well. We also have Paul Nzomo Mbuthi, who is the Kenya Senior Deputy Director of Renewable Energy. A round of applause for him. John, would you like to invite the rest of them? Or it's all mine, right? Christina Skieka, who is the CEO for Power for All. I hope I pronounced your last name right. Radia Sedawi, who is the Chief Energy Section, Sustainable Development Policies Division at UNESCO. And we also have Vardhani Ratnala, who is the Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist, International Solar Alliance. David Lecoq, who is the CEO, Alliance for Rural Electrification, and Coalition Steering Group member. A round of applause for him. Kanika Chola, who is the Director and Chief of Staff, Sustainable Energy for All. Round of applause for her. And last but not least, Welberger Hemmetsberger, CEO, Solar Power Europe. Her name sort of sounds like a tongue twister. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And it's such an honor to have you all speak about an important issue, solar PV, or solar photovoltaic, a gender perspective. And I'm going to start with Wahlberger, because I believe that what you're going to say is very key to the entire conversation. I know, I'm putting you on the spot, but you've been working in the sector for 20 years or so. And their findings regarding the gender challenges that we are looking at in the study as well. But as Rabia mentioned, solar PV seems to be the renewable energy technology employing the largest share of women, not just in Europe, but globally. And in this case, the question would be why, and I know that John sort of indirectly asked the same question to Rabia, but why is this? And what is the solar PV sector doing better to increase this number of women in the sector?
No, it was on. Yeah, I think all the microphones should be on. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Thanks.
But first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations to Irina, to Rabia, and team for this very critical report. We're very happy to have this report and being able to also showcase, how good this solar sector is doing, but at the same time we need to do better. But just to maybe, before I answer your question, confirm a little bit what I'm seeing happening on the ground. And that is exactly what your figures are showing. Just to give you 2 examples, and that has changed over the last couple of 3 or 4 years, I would say. And I'm referring to your numbers in the management, because I think that's the most important, STEM jobs and management. Where when I came in as CEO of Solar Power Europe, in my board there was no single woman. Now, out of 15 board members, I have 5 women, which is very nice. But one other example, which is even nicer, I'm going to organize a CEO meeting of the big solar companies in a couple of weeks' time. 12 CEOs confirmed their presence, and 1/3 will be women. And I think this is something which we have not seen some 3-4 years ago, and I hope this will further improve. Now, to your question, and actually, Rabia, you have already given the answer to you, John.
I probably should have looked at all the questions beforehand, but Joy and I collaborated on all of those except for the first question.
So I do think we have the advantage of being still a relatively young industry, even if solar has existed for many, many years. But really the uptake and the massive growth, we have seen it in the last couple of years. And that makes that, I guess the industry has the advantage of, starting from a different basis, bringing more dynamism into it. Decentralized access to energy is for sure also another element which is playing in the favor of the solar sector, and the skill set, which is very diverse. So we're not just looking at specific skills, but we are looking at a very diverse skill set we need in the solar sector. We have produced our own jobs report now for 2 years in a row, where we are highlighting the skills which are needed. We also came up with a jobs platform, and we'll be presenting a skills set, list of sets in just a couple of weeks' time. So I do think there is, in many, many different areas, great opportunities for women. One thing what I would like to highlight is one sector where we're really not doing well, which is the installers. And the installers make up for a major part of the work we are creating in the solar sector. But I do think that there's also many different ways how we can improve that by the way, solar is installed, for example. The size of panels obviously also plays a role. It's heavy lifting. So we have to maybe also look into that, because this is the area where we absolutely need a lot of people joining us in order to support the massive growth we are looking at. So we need to make it also attractive for installers, female installers, to join our sector.
Right. Okay, and now I want to come to Ms. Horn, sorry, I beg your pardon. In terms of the report that Irina has released on the perspective of women in solar PV, being slightly higher than it was in 2012. And you know, the fact that we are seeing that by 2026, companies will need up to 40% of the unprecedented sex among non-executive directors, or about 33% among all the directors. Based on your experience in the sector, and as a woman leader as well in the same, what's your take from your personal experiences in regard to measuring how we can increase this, but also breaking the glass ceiling? Because I think at the top is where most of the challenges are. It's not really in the middle level management, but really at the top and staying at the top.
Yeah, that's a very important question. And so I became minister 25 years ago. That was another time, even in Germany. But that was really a situation that most of the newspapers, journalists said, is she able to be a minister in such a big ministry, to control the chemical industry, to deal with the steel industry, to be part of the allowance of miners and deal with energy companies, you know, and is she able to talk with the farmer associations as a Minister of Agriculture? And I think the farmers at the time thought that was a double shock, you know, the woman and from the Green Party, that was really the worst case. And I think what I learned in this time was maybe the same as a lot of other women now are learning in a lot of other countries. So it helped me that I have a master in mathematics and economy, you know, so that means a lot of men said, wow, so, okay, a bit respect, you know. So I think it's very, very important. We talked about what is about the studies of women, what can help, and we talked about a good training. And that's what we are doing, for example, now in Africa, because I'm now special representative of energy in Africa, and we are investing a lot of training women to make them, to bring them to a better level and have a chance to come in these positions we are talking about, because that's a long way. You have to start, and then you have some women on the next level, and so on. For example, we have now the situation in Germany from the Green Party. We decided that all of our positions, half of them, a minimum of half of them, must be from women. It can be 60% or 70%, but minimum 50%. And now we have the situation, for example, in the Green Parliamentarian Group in the German Bundestag, that 80% of the parliamentarians who are acting in energy issues are women. 80%, you know, so that means it needs a long time for one step after the other, and even, for example, working together, have a network, and that's maybe the next point. I think it's very important in Africa too, because if you have women in a high-level position, often they are discriminated, so they have a really hard situation there. And if they have others who can help them, even what the men have, they have their networks, they help each other, you know. And we, from the women, must learn to do it the same. What I learned in Africa is that the smaller the solar systems are, the better is the influence of the women. For example, solar home systems. I talked I had a lot of talks with solar home system companies, and they told me they may make only contracts with women because the women will pay the money back. You know, they are not sure whether the men will do that, but the women will pay the money back. And when I'm talking with all these women, they were very proud to have their cell phone under their T-shirt,
Right.
had their small solar system, and could charge the cell phones from the neighbors, have some income. So I think that's really the situation with solar home systems.
Right.
And for example, if you have bigger grids, local grids, they have a positive impact for productive use. For if you are, for example, drying fruits or drying vegetable or grind the corn or cool the fish, often the women have the benefit of it. So maybe we don't have only to look for positions in solar companies. Maybe we have to look for the indirect impact of solar and access to electricity for the women. I think that is very important.
I think what's clear is that women have a lower risk. When you invest in women, the risk is lower compared to the male gender. No offense at all. Over to you, John.
I would like to ask you to clarify that, though. What's the which risk are we embedding here? So I know. You want to
Go ahead, John.
No, because I was going to say in media, and I think Joy would agree with me on this. I mean, literally from the late 1980s until I finished in 2021, I always reported to women. So in media, it's kind of really gender agnostic, and I find, particularly in the control room with an executive producer or producer, you would prefer to have a woman because there was no irrationality in these big decision making. They could multitask much better than the men could, and it was a much more soothing experience to have an executive producer or a producer to be a woman. But in our business, it was always that way. It was gender neutral. In fact, we had a lot of women leaders at CNN throughout the career, also at PBS in America. So I thought it was refreshing. I was a G7, obviously, country where I came from in the United States. Let's stay with Germany and Vera, if we can here. I know there's a gender survey that's been done in the energy sector looking at the G7. You work in the Ministry of Economic Affairs as the Deputy Director General. What are the indications here, and is it more pronounced in the developed versus the developing world, which is well represented here? Please.
Yes, thank you. It's Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Actually, we
I forgot
put
the climate
two together.
action. That's
Yeah,
a very good,
important to us.
It's actually it's really smart that you put them together. So thanks for making the point.
Exactly. Thank you. The report looked at the G7 countries. It was the Canadian G7 presidency in 2018 that did the Challenge Equal by 2030 campaign, and in our G7 presidency of Germany last year, we looked at what are the G7 countries doing in the energy sector overall, so not just renewables, of overall, what are the energy ministries doing there, and what's the share there. So it was the G7 report on gender equality and diversity in the energy sector. So first of all, the good news is the share of women in the staff and in senior management is between 40 and 60% in the majority of the G7 ministries. So that's encouraging when looking at the whole of the sector. I mean, the solar and renewable sector fares better overall than the sort of fossil or traditional sector. But obviously that's only goes so far as good news. And another thing was also what we found in the solar PV, that a lot of the data was missing. But from what we got is that there are persistent gender gaps still. So there is obviously the wage gap, which ranges between 7 and 23% in the G7 members. Where the data is available, that means that women overall earn 7 to 23% less than men when they have the same skills. There is the gender employment gap in the energy sectors, and that ranges from 68 to 80%. And that means 80% is that there are 20 women for every 100 men working in the energy sector, so that is quite significant if you have a gap of 68 to 80%. So while the ministries are working on that, and we're working on equal pay and equal participation, there is still quite some way to go. The ministries as such are rolling out programs to address some of the barriers through hiring practices, quotas, and being more sensitive about gender and cultural bias. And obviously the way you can combine your work and the care work that is unpaid, there are several ways to address it. Could be, we've come a long way. One of the positive side effects of COVID was that in that sector of work, you could actually work from home. And giving that flexibility helps. Flexible times, parental leaves are all things that if the company is able to, or the sector is and ministry is able to offer it, that really helps. But overall, it's actually, we have to be sensitive to the cultural bias. For example, if we run campaigns on renewable or energy efficiency, then often you see the installers are men, and when we look at how we can save energy at home, those are women. So often it's the cultural sensitivity with which we perpetuate that. And moving away from G7 and some of the work we do with our partners in the energy partnerships, we also have this energizing, women energize women. So it also goes a long way to women supporting each other, where we have mentoring programs, capacity building programs, and also addressing this bias through communication, where we also support women in media, how they address these things. So many things can be done, but what we found in the report, at least in the G7 countries, there are still many gaps which we need to address.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Vera. The other thing I'll just mention, and everybody's done it so far, we're just keeping each intervention to 3 minutes, because we want to allow 10 minutes for some questions from the floor as well. Is that okay? Joy?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And Vera mentioned, those biases that we do have. And I want to come to Dr. Yamkela, because coming from Sierra Leone, you must see some of these biases in traditional roles especially. And many African countries and countries in the global south, generally developing countries, do face these challenges. And, the gender empowerment campaign is an endless one in countries like the African countries, where traditional cultural roles take a place that disempowers women. And so you have to strike a balance between women's rights and what exactly they need to get empowered to be able to do what they would do in terms of self-actualization. So talk to us about gender empowerment in that context.
Of course, these cultural biases affect women's participation across the board in many economic activities, including in the energy space. Typically, in some of our own cultures, women don't own assets. So if you don't own assets for farming, for other economic activities, when it comes to owning energy technology also becomes a problem. Sometimes they are not also part of making the economic decisions for the community. They are relegated to the household activities. So those biases also come to play in the energy sector. I think for me, one of the most crucial one is that ownership of assets. Rabia mentioned, for example, that in the solar PV space, the smaller the units, the more ownership you have of women. And so for me, that's important, because in our African context, the operations in the agribusiness sector after the farm, in some commodities, 60 to 80% are performed by women. And when you look at the value addition activities, most of them require energy interventions. Whether they're processing the food to take to market, or for that matter, doing preservation of agricultural produce, requires heat interventions. The same thing with the drying, the milling, and so on. So I would say that we need to, in designing these technologies, we need more participation of women. I have seen a good case in India, in my days at Sustainable Energy for All, in Gujarat. We saw the Self-Employed Women's Association actually working with companies on solar irrigation systems for women vegetable growers. We also saw cases where, again, because India has original equipment manufacturers, where the Women's Association were also working with some of those manufacturers in designing cook stoves and other inputs. I deviate a little bit into cook stoves. For me, women in energy is about economic empowerment, particularly in the African context. in the, I emphasize the cooking dimension, because a lot of the food processing, as I said, they use firewood and charcoal. Babel has seen that in her visits to Africa. Maybe Paul might touch on that a little bit. So we need more women participation in design. We need more women participation in public policy. My parliament have been fighting for 30% inclusion of women. When I did it as an opposition, the government did not want to back it. They came with their own separate bill, but I was happy. I said, fine, 2 years after I was advocating, if you do it to get the praise, I back you as well. So I supported the government move. So now we have a quota, 30% quota for women. That becomes important as a parliamentarian, because that's a decision point. So again, we talk about their role in corporate, the corporate level, but I believe their participation in politics and policy making is going to be important as well.
Great.
Good. Let's get a bigger picture evaluation. We've heard from the G7 with Vera, but Vardhani Ratnala is a monitoring and evaluation specialist at the International Solar Alliance. Again, you've reached out to do an annual report to get an assessment of the various parameters in hiring in this sector. What's the key findings that you have here in terms of gender hiring? I think also another point we should be bringing up here is also gender training. Are we getting the right education in for technical skills, but also in the STEM areas as well? Are we encouraging STEM educations? What are you finding out? Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's a very, very interesting question. We at International Solar Alliance, we've been trying through our flagship reports, one of which is the Ease of Doing Solar report, to try and gather information on some of these aspects, like, how are the capacity building skills progressing? What do evaluations tell us? So while we have not commissioned evaluations per se, we've tried to see what information exists already. And I have to say that there's a real dearth of information on some of these aspects. While broadly you get to know that, these are the number of women who have been trained, if you actually try to delve deeper to try and understand what are the capacity gaps of the women and have these gaps been addressed. Like, for example, we've said about the gender pay gap, or we've said about, women lacking knowledge on particular aspects of solar energy, like, for example, repairing cook stoves. If she is the person who is involved in that business and is not aware or doesn't have the capacity to repair the cook stove, then do we have data which tells us, that, yes, she's been provided, some kind of an intervention to address that gap? This kind of information is definitely not available. Even evaluations which are there are more, I would say, one-off kind of evaluations. There is no standardization in terms of the methodologies that are used. Similarly, even if I want to aggregate evaluations across countries to try and understand one particular aspect of gender, that is also not possible. One, because standard methodologies are not there. Two, because all information is not available publicly. And three, even if it is available publicly, it just cannot be compared because it's like apples and oranges. So these are some very, very critical gaps that exist in the current scenario, but these can be addressed, and some efforts towards providing indicator on certain gender indicators are there. Like, for example, you have the World Bank's SMAP's SDG 7 indicator, which provides you some information on indicators like, clean cooking or access to electricity. But again, these are not gender disaggregated, so information on this is not available. And if you look at, information on gender mainstreaming per se, again, you realize that, the definition of gender mainstreaming differs from organization to organization. Some organizations think gender mainstreaming is basically looking at your workforce in terms of, pay gaps or discrimination, etc. But gender mainstreaming could also mean things like, in my programmatic interventions, what kind of a positive discrimination I'm showing to women. Am I promoting programs which are pro-women? Am I ensuring that women benefit more than men, given the fact that they are the ones who, face the brunt of climate action? So some of these things also need to be considered in evaluations.
Good. Thank you very much.
All right, Christina, I'm coming to you now because earlier this morning we're talking about decentralizing solutions for those living in remote and isolated communities. But also when you think about it, with the work that you're doing, powering job census, there's been so much data that you've been able to collect. And looking at the report that IRENA has released on the solar PV perspective, or the gender perspective on solar PV, are you able to corroborate the information with the data that you've gathered, together with the findings in the IRENA report?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And let me just edit one thing you said, which is decentralized renewables isn't just for isolated communities. It has a huge need to fill in urban areas as well as peri-urban areas, not just rural areas. It's an issue of reliability. And where I'm from, California, we have a very big need right now today to deal with decentralized energy, given what's happening with our floods. But a little bit about Power for All, for those who don't know us so well. So we are a global campaign that's focused on ending energy poverty by the really sort of fit-for-purpose solution, advancing that market for decentralized renewables. So we do this study. The need really came from a number of meetings, oftentimes in countries where we focus on, countries that have 50% or less of the population with energy access, trying to really pitch governments on making it easier to do business for the companies who support the sector. And every single time we would have these meetings, the question would come back, well, what are the outcomes? Show me the jobs. And at that point, there were no numbers. And so we took some inspiration from a couple of the studies, IRENA's being one of them for sure, and really dug in and developed the first comprehensive set of data by first interviewing a number of companies and then doing focus groups to get some richness behind that data to really understand what's the nature of jobs in our sector. And, first of all, the good banner news, right, which is, to date, this sector is employing approximately about 500,000 people across the world. And that is got a hockey stick trajectory alongside the numbers that IRENA sees. So we are an important and growing sector within renewables themselves. And also similar to IRENA's findings, we did arrive at a number of around an average of 32% of those jobs in decentralized renewables are held by women, and there's a real disparity across countries. So we see those largest numbers in Kenya. Paul will be happy to hear that, around 40%. But then in India, we see a real drop-off. It's something closer to 20%. But still, it's a growing issue about how to employ more women. And one of the things that we do see, contrary to more sort of fossil fuel type numbers and jobs themselves, right? So it's something around 20 or 22% on average for the fossil fuel industry is female. But there's a huge amount of flexibility actually built into this sector because so much of this, we were hearing earlier about the great job women do as sales agents, and that's 100% true. I guess one of the things that's great about that to say as well is when we go back to some of the barriers and challenges identified in the IRENA report, same thing, but there is flexibility built into those roles oftentimes, and because so much of those sales happen at that village level by reinforcement and local influencers, really sort of building the reputation and value of the solar, that definitely shines through. But I do want to also point out that something we haven't talked about too much today, Kande was touching on it earlier, is the role of women in agriculture and the potential for renewables to transform the agricultural sector. And that's something that we as an organization are going to be talking about more and more, but I think we're just, it's a tipping point where we start to discuss the role of productive use technologies powered by decentrals to just completely change people's lives. And especially because in many countries, largely in sub-Saharan Africa, 50% or more of the employment in smallholder farmer communities is women. It's even higher in India. And so when you look at what something like a solar-powered water pump or solar-powered cold storage could do to not just transform productivity, but also transform incomes, it's really revolutionary. We're really on the tip of something big here. But just a final comment, anytime I hear, people ask the question about how do we improve employment for women, I mean, you just hire more women. That's what you do. But I think beyond that, we need more female founders. I'll say that again and again, and every time I get a chance to speak, because we have not created this system. Right? We did not create a business as usual approach, and so we will change business as usual simply by being people ourselves who create businesses, who run organizations, and who then pass that power that we accumulate on to other women. Thanks very much.
Very good. Thank you, Christina. It's good to hear your clarity as well. We have to watch our time, so we're nearly 10 past. We have 20 minutes left. So I'm going to ask for the interventions to be 3 minutes or less. Again, David Lecoq is the CEO of the Alliance for Rural Electrification, the oldest and largest in the world when it comes to distributed renewables in emerging markets. So it's very good to have the gauge. But, the question I asked earlier about training in the workforce, and as a former emerging markets editor of CNN, I was always watching to see how we can train in the developing world at a faster pace. For some of the off-grid solutions we've been looking at. What do you find?
Well, thank you very much. And indeed, it's David Lecoq from ARE, Alliance for Rural Electrification. I would say if we start with ourselves, so now we are 250 almost companies, investors, developers, and so on. I do see over the more or less a decade that I've been there now more and more female founders, to your point, Christina. I think that's a really important aspect, actually, and also more in senior positions.
In which parts of the world, out of curiosity, David?
About half, 60% is based either in Europe or North America, and the rest is mostly African and some Southeast Asian companies.
Okay, good. No, because my experience in traveling in Africa is that the women entrepreneurs was really impressive when they, in the rural areas in particular.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I think if I start with ourselves because I think it's always good when you form an opinion to see what you've been doing yourself first. So that's in terms of our membership, what we're constituting. And that's also one of the things we look at when we get a new application is the gender distribution in the company. The second level is then also internally. I think Walburga mentioned about the board. In our case, it's something like 40% of them are women. And in our secretariat, which I'm heading, it's 55%. So we are getting to more or less half of the population, so to have that reflectiveness. If I look then at the work that we see in the market done by ourselves as well as all of these different companies on training, I would say there are two key elements. The first one is, here we talk about empowering women, addressing a need. I would add to that, I think one of the speakers before mentioned, it's also necessary. It's not just addressing a need, but there is a need to increase the size and the skills in the workforce because 70% of our companies struggle to find good applicants and loyal applicants in the domestic workforce. So first of all, there is a need to address, of course, women empowerment, but also an opportunity to create enormous, almost doubling really of the workforce just by including women. So it's really not it's a no-brainer, frankly. And then the second thing I think that's useful to mention is an initiative that we co-launched together with IRENA, ICA, and a few other partners, which is called CORE, Cornerstone of Rural Electrification, specifically about technical training for solar installations, in which we have included a gender lens and target really technical training skills. So to your point on training in the field, well, that's what we're really trying to address. And as I started with my intervention, trying to lead by example, because coming from private sector, often, and I guess it's the same in public sector, you need to see it before you to convince those that are still hesitating. And so we hope that by trying to set the example internally as well as with these kind of initiatives, that we see the change in the field, because we know, I think Ms. Heun mentioned it, women are extremely important in in the field, both as customers as well as sales agents, more reliable. We get that data from our company as well in terms of paying. So you have even the specific gender marketing for that purpose. So for me, this is quite clear, but definitely more needs to be done, and that's why we try to be a bit of inspiration.
Anecdotally, my wife always said that you'd make a fortune in the UK if you had a women's plumbing group, because they would show up on time, get it done, and come up with solutions. And we had that case with the satellite provider. We had 3 men installers that couldn't figure it out. We had the woman come in, it was like done in 30 minutes. And she was dedicated to get it done before she would leave the building, whereas some of our male counterparts were not as dedicated. Joy?
I see you're coming to my side from the earlier thought
Yes,
that
exactly.
I had about gender. All right, and so Kanika, we've talked about solar PV, but let's for a minute talk about sustainable energy capacity, because we already see that with what we so far have, there is a chance of boosting productive use activities. And so how do we support gender empowerment with the already existing sustainable energy that we have in the market globally today?
Thank you for that, Joy. And I think in many ways, the answer to this question is not dissimilar to the first question that both John and you posed about why are there so many more jobs in solar than in everything else? And then why are there so many more jobs for women in solar than everything else? And I think it's because solar perhaps is the most democratic of energy options. It's democratic in terms of the regions of the world where it is available. Most of the world at some point of the day, week, month, or year does have the sunshine, but also because of its scale, size, and application. Whereas a lot of the other renewable energy technologies are used either for power generation alone or for very specific applications in end-use sectors, solar kind of is one of those fit-it-anywhere kind of technologies. And I think that's also why it generates so many jobs, because it can be quite job-intensive when it's at smaller scales. But I think that it is this indirect jobs that we've been talking about a little bit today that is so important, and that's where solar's real power lies. And I think that I liked to think of today's panel not as a gender panel, but a solar and gender panel, which is kind of what it is also titled, right? Because it is the power of solar PV to unlock opportunities for women around the world, to address underserved sectors in ways that have not yet been done. And this includes everything about gender, including maternal health, for instance, because it can power health clinics. It considers everything from education and technical skilling and manufacturing of applications for women, but also health benefits, because if women are engaged in income-generating activities, then their time is no longer free, and therefore they wouldn't have to collect firewood, which has a host of kind of security and health impacts. So I think that the ripple effect of what solar can unlock for women is something that we haven't even fully captured, despite the plethora of really good work that has been done by several of the agencies represented on the stage today, but most definitely by Irina. And I think this is really where the opportunity lies. How can women use solar PV to unlock income-generating activities that gives them freedom, that gives them an opportunity to make household decisions, that gives them an opportunity to participate in political decision-making, as Kande was mentioning earlier? I think it's the take responsibility and take where you are empowering yourself. And I think that this can start really small. It can start with someone who was using, kind of doing some stitching, using a machine that was kind of not powered at all and doing maybe 2 shirts a day, to then doing 20 shirts a day. Right? And I think so it can be something as small as that to, of course, cold storage and maternal health. And so I think that it is really the limitations of what renewables or solar specifically can unlock are only in our imagination, and the imagination of women and men alike. So I think that really, for me, it is really a call to action that let's use more and more of these applications, many of which will emerge in the global south, and there will be women founders because women will solve problems that they have lived experience on as well. So I think in a way that it's kind of the circular virtuous cycle.
Right.
It's interesting what's happened with mobile phones in Africa. For example, the last 15 years, right? It's kind of cut out the bricks and mortars in the banking sector because they were getting a lot of solutions digitally, which is what you're suggesting here. Radia Sadawi of UNESCO, am I saying it correctly? We talked about having entrepreneurs. We address entrepreneurs in Africa, but let's look at Western Asia. I think we've had a whole Instagram generation of different entrepreneurs, right? They've been marketing their products, but in the energy sector, and you're chief of that sector at the organization, what are we finding are the barriers to entrepreneurs in West Asia?
First, thank you very much, and I would like to thank Irina for the leadership on giving the data which are critical to really provide insight for policymakers and put the KPIs for which we all, we thank the leadership also for Rabia and her team, really continuously working on that. I don't have something to add on what was said because when it comes to regional, we have mostly the same challenges and the report very much highlighted that. But I may say that there are certain factors that you may find them in certain regions which are not sometimes similar, like the Esquire region. It's basically we are talking about the really heterogeneous region between the GCC where you have the capacity in terms of finance at least, so you don't have necessarily problems in terms of building the economy of the country, and obviously it might be just a question of social norms, but at the same time you do have the LDCs in the African continent who are also which are part of the Arab region, although those in the Mashriq. So the challenges basically that come up as highlighted in the report coming first obviously from the social norms, which I define them as perceptions but not as something embedded in the society. The simple example, I just come from Saudi Arabia, and I would like to invite all of you to really visit today the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because just in a few years, huge development in the country, just because it was a perception when we spoke about social norms, but under the leadership of the kingdom, we've seen that it just in a few years, we see that women are working in all the workplace. But what comes to this change,
it's,
before speaking...
37%.
Exactly, and I would like really to visit. After 1 year, I did the tracking of the data. We met the Minister of Foreign Affairs and His Royal Highness Minister of Energy, looking what are the KPIs they were considering. And they said, it's not about gender, it's about how you put the KPIs of the economic development of your country. So you have the economy, the social, and the environment, and you come up not going to a government saying that I want to address the gender, I just want to ensure that the ranking of my country in this 1, 2, 3 indicators should be improved. So if I'm talking about artificial intelligence, how I can really reach a certain level. If I'm talking about the energy sector, how I can. So big in that, so the KPIs are integrated. So we are not talking about please increase 50%. We are talking about I want to reach this level in this indicator, and with that you need to have the skills, and the skills exist in this cut. That's why you have highly educated women in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that we see them now in the workflows, and we see the result. And I think at the Climate Week in October, you will be impressed with what you visit. It was not an announcement.
We just have to watch the time, Radia.
Yes, watch the time. And keep your horse as well. Talking about the entrepreneurship as well, I think what was presented, and also Yumkilla referred to that, and he was inspiring me. Actually, he didn't know, but I moved from the oil and gas sector to the UN system because one presentation he made when he was special envoy of Sustainable Energy for All, it was an international energy forum in Russia, sometimes in 2011, and he was speaking about the access to energy, and he was referring to the gender. This was my inspiration. He just maybe knew it for the first time. And this led me to speak about the rural within my region. One of the major challenges is that basically rural context, this is where you have the problem of energy access, but at the same time you have huge potential for entrepreneurship. And one of the critical elements why we implemented an integrated business model, looking to entrepreneurship using small-scale PV, but at the same time clean cooking, and looking how to work with the rural women entrepreneur and cooperatives. And we found out that basically everything when it comes to the rural and community engagement, the participant approach works perfectly, and you make things happen. But when it comes to the policy level, we have a lack of participatory approach. So we were not really able to put in integrated KPIs that help policymakers understand what that means, the gender perspective, and addressing the gender gap. But however, from entrepreneurship perspective, the PV manufacturing, I think within the region, I would like just to emphasize that in terms of the education in STEAM, we have high level of education. All the studies showed that the engineering very much increasing. However, when it comes to the access to jobs and to comes to basically to due to the social norms, due to the awareness as well, we have a serious problem on gaps in addressing this. And continuously capacity building are needed, but at the same time capacity building that are very much targeted. Not only you speak about the young generation or before having access to vocational training or having access also to the universities. If I may to add just one point.
Yeah, Radia, we have to
allow
move
me
on.
to
Yeah.
interject
Yes.
just
Thanks.
for the sake
Thank you
of
very
talking
much.
about the targeted capacity building. Paul, you're going to have to borrow your minutes back because I'm going to give you 2 minutes because Radia has taken up at least half of your time. So in 2019, Kenya's Ministry of Energy launched the gender policy to raise awareness on gender and also change the attitudes within the energy sector. This was probably the first of its kind on the African continent because it was focused particularly on the energy sector. Do you think that this can be replicated in other African countries, and also how do you suggest that they do that?
Thank you very much, and let me just briefly say we appreciate Irina for inviting us to share some perspectives. Yes, we launched a gender energy policy in 2019, and this was a product of a process that had been going on for some time. Back in 2007, we had just completed an audit of the energy policy, agenda audit, which looked at how the policy responded to the various gender concerns. I was privileged to have been the leader of that study, and it is out of that study that it triggered so many other activities leading to the policy being formulated. And yes, to say, before I say whether this can be replicated, indeed, there has been quite a lot of replication on this experience. Because immediately after this audit, there was, in 2010, one of our utilities, Kenya Power and Lighting, was able to prepare a gender policy, and that policy was used as a model by several other countries, including Liberia, Nepal, Ghana, and Botswana, among others. And it is during this process that also the issue of sustainable energy for all came, and we were able to mainstream into that process the gender concerns. And that is what really triggered the need for the policy, because we did realize that there were gaps, and some of those were policy gaps. Now, in terms of the replication, yes, many countries can replicate, of course, with the contextualizing to the local circumstances. But I think the message is very clear, and in our Kenyan context, we've had so many other spring out activities, including in the Kenya Energy Generation Company, we have something called the Pink Initiative. And this initiative is really trying to bring women engineers, young engineers, mentor them, train them, and this has really enabled the gender mainstreaming. And thanks to a lot of partners who have been involved, including Energia Practical Action, they have enabled the country to look at the various dimensions. And to finish, let me say, the Kenyan Constitution currently has very clear provisions on gender, the gender mainstreaming. We have what we call the 1/3 gender rule, which says there is none of the gender should being given more than 2/3 of any appointive positions. So whether it is in parliament, whether it is in, within the other operational areas, this is being observed. Of course, we are not yet there, but it triggers a process where everybody has to be saying, if you don't meet the 2/3 gender rule, then you are violating the Constitution.
Right.
And this has been really the clarion sort of tagging that enables Kenya to progress. And we think it can be replicated in other places because we know that gender disparities are causing problems in terms of effectiveness of projects and programs. Because where you don't involve women in various decisions and activities, then they are disproportionately being adversely impacted, and therefore the need to strive to ensure some bit of gender equality.
I like that you put
Thank
it
you
that
very
way.
Okay,
John.
thank you, Paul. This will be our last interjection, just so we're on the same page here because of time. Rabia was going to do some closing remarks, but she said we have the cocktail hour and the dinner, so she'll get a chance to talk to everybody. So this is the last question here on the stage. And in American vernacular, Rosalinda, we say you use your cleanup hitter to do the best to finish it off. So no pressure, right? As the Deputy National Energy Secretary of Panama, we had the great participation in the PPD as well from one of your colleagues. I was quite shocked with what she said about this push for the energy transition in Panama. What are we finding out in terms of the gender drive at the same time? Please.
So thank you very much for the opportunity. In Panama, we are very committed with the transition. And for the last 2 years, we have been working on really making a just and inclusive energy transition. And for that, we designed a Women and Energy Nexus roadmap in order to assure that the more than 141,000 jobs that are going to be created by the energy transition have to be in parity. And to do so, we are implementing this roadmap to assure that we are not only working on sensitization, capacity building, but also to assure the conditions within the private sector and also the necessity of the general population to understand what are the opportunities of the energy transition in the consumer side will create more jobs. And when we are talking about PV, for us in Panama right now, for the gap between 2021 and 2024, more than 4,500 of employment are going to be created in the PV installment. And for that, right now, we have just finished a pilot project with indigenous communities where it was amazing to really see the power of transformation of the knowledge and energy transition in those women. We select 25 women from rural areas. They didn't know how to read, nor didn't have a formal employment before that. And after 280 hours of capacity building process related and how to become installers of isolated PV systems. And after more than 80 hours of classes around how to be an entrepreneur, how to know more about financing, how to know more about women empowerment. Right now, those ladies are part of our Solar Panamanian Energy Chamber, and they are talking one-to-one with the different professionals in the energy sector. And for us, it's very important to know the power of change when you enable the knowledge to arise to the communities. And this is not only a way for us to comply with our energy transition agenda, but also is the perfect way in order to assure that we accelerate the closing of the universal access to energy gap. They, right now, 2 months after this capacity building process, they are working in their communities, installing solar PV systems to assure that universal access to electricity. And is very related also to clean cooking. They want to cook with electricity as well. And in that way, we as government, we as the private sector that really was a fundamental part of the process. And we as associations as well are pushing forward what the energy transition can bring for development to assure, because we talk a lot about the plans, a lot about the numbers, a lot of what we want to do, but we have to focus on action, and in that way we can comply with the goal to have universal access to energy before 2030. And right now, just to close, because I know that I don't have too much time, the community that we start talk with the other indigenous communities, and this year we are going to have a second round that is going to be greater than the one before, but also the other educational institutions wants to be part of this type of project as well, to make it permanent, to assure that we achieve this 2030 complying with SDG 7.
Good. One of those things we didn't get a chance to talk
and
about.
13.
And 13. No, I was going to say, you took the words out of my mouth almost, is that women are much more sensitive to the SDG goals. The goals are out there, but they need to be met, right? I think that's the message we're learning off the closing statement, which has been very good.
Great.
I do want to extend, and I'm going to let Joy wrap us up, but thank you very much for putting this panel together. Cecilia, Rabia, again, as the panel kept on saying, that's been your vision. So I'm sorry you don't get the closing comments, but I think you wanted to do it that way, so you'll do it at the cocktail hour. Joy, I don't want to be cliche, but you're a joy to work with. So do you have any closing thoughts before we get off the stage here?
It's cliche, but I'll take it. I'll take it, John. Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure working with you as well. And yeah, from this conversation, I think we can clearly see that we're all looking towards a common goal, which is to engender the energy sector, renewable energy sector particularly. And I think this is a great, I don't want to say a great start, because the work already started as far back as before 2012. But I think that we can do more. We just need to be serious about the action part, because it's the action that is going to give us results. And I think that if you're in the room here in a decision-making position, you should take that up and change the world as well. So thank you so much. Thanks, John, and thanks to all our panelists. A round of applause for them. And also, a round of applause to all of us who have stuck throughout this conversation. We do appreciate the time you've taken to make it through. We do have some cocktails outside and some bitings, so feel free to partake in them. Yeah. So thank you all so much. Tomorrow is a big day, so be sure to keep time. If you're speaking tomorrow, let this be the rehearsal you need for tomorrow, that you're not going to have more than 3 minutes of speaking time, okay?
People are going to wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the 3-minute clock, right, instead of the alarm clock. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure. I think they wanted to get a group shot on the stage, if you can come forward. Thank you.